Hi, everybody. Hank Winchester. Help me, Hank. We're live here in the Click on Digital studio at the WDAV studios in downtown Detroit. We've been following the developments, and I'm sure it's a story that you've been following and watching not only on air on Local 4, but also clickondetroit.com. The new information regarding the Cantrell funeral home. This is a funeral home that has been under investigation by the state for quite some time, but the discovery that was recently found in the funeral home, in the attic of the funeral home, those remains, unclaimed remains, fetuses, obviously very concerning, and has now launched into a full police investigation. Defender Karen Drew, Local 4 news anchor Karen Drew, worked this story yesterday and was able to uncover surprising information that, in fact, when she was in the building, had been told by the owner of the building that some of his staff had found even more remains, cremated remains, down in the basement. Karen Drew is going to join us here in a minute to give us some of her insight about her story yesterday. We did just get some information, new information, which is why we wanted to break in and talk with you today regarding the licensing of this establishment. In fact, this information is coming from the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs with Lansing, otherwise known as LARA. Basically, they provided us with a timeline of when this funeral home got into the system and the activity they've had with this funeral home over the years. So it goes back to 1985. That is when Raymond Cantrell obtained his mortuary science license for this establishment. And basically, if you skip ahead from 85 up into the mid-90s, then they had some issues with licensing. It wasn't until 2017 that investigators appeared on site regarding multiple complaints. Inspections revealed a lot of issues within the funeral home itself. This is a story that I remember covering because there were family members who had loved ones that basically were being held hostage. Their bodies in the funeral home, their remains in the funeral home, they weren't able to get them because of a lack of cooperation from the Cantrell funeral home. And then this information came out within the last week regarding those remains, the fetuses and the infant child that was found within the attic of the funeral home. So then that gets us to yesterday, and when Karen's here, we'll go through the timeline a little bit more. But I want to take you to yesterday because Karen Drew's reporting really took this story in a whole nother direction, providing us not only a look inside the building itself, down into the basement, into the attic, but also providing new information about those recently discovered cremated remains found by a worker in the basement. So if we have it right now, let's take a look at Karen's story, and then by the time that wraps up, Karen can join us and provide us some information and insight.
The little closet here.
The current owner of the building, Nived Syed, showed me where the decomposing bodies of 11 infants were found. Up these steps, behind all of this insulation.
Right there.
Yeah.
I took a look myself because I was like so many, wondering how these bodies could have been hidden without anyone noticing.
We walked past about 10-15 times here. Never seen this thing.
And that's when our story took a grisly and disturbing turn.
And that isn't the only discovery that's been made. We just found out more remains have just been found down these steps in the basement. The remains of 2 people were found today and another 2 people just a couple days ago. Here in the basement, one of the workers was here this morning cleaning. He tells me he found the remains of one individual in a plastic bag in a plastic container over behind this shelf. And then way back there in the dark, in the corner, he found the remains of another person just thrown away like trash.
The worker who made the find didn't want to talk on camera. Understandably, many are worried there could be more discoveries. Still, so much to clean. The facility so large. I also made a stop at the AQ Cantrell Funeral Home in East Point. Now, this is where state investigators made a surprise inspection yesterday after receiving a tip. I went inside. No one was willing to talk. In an issued statement from the attorney representing the East Point facility, he said, nothing out of order was found. It is unfortunate that some individuals are implicating my client. Meantime, back at the Detroit Cantrell Funeral Home, the cleanup continues. The owner turning this place into a community center. But first, planning on a prayer service this weekend for those who still have so many unanswered questions on who has been left behind here.
The little closet here.
So that was the story. I was talking to the viewers before you walked in here. regarding the defender investigation from yesterday. Now, I had been in the funeral home before.
Right.
Just in the main lobby area. So we were talking about the discovery.
And you were back like in April when it was more of a funeral home.
It was more of a funeral home, and the reason it was such a concern at that point is because there were family members who had loved ones there, and because of the investigation and what was being found, people's loved ones were basically trapped inside the funeral home. They couldn't get them out. They couldn't have their funeral service. But what you discovered yesterday really took what was a really disturbing and shocking story even to another level. So my curiosity with you, because I wasn't in any of those parts of the funeral, what's it like to walk in and how did it happen? Just tell me how it happened.
So we pull up because I just wanted to see where, and this sounds horrible, where the 11 decomposing bodies were. Because my main thing when we talk about the stories, how can people not notice this? How can people not notice remains? Or so it's like maybe, I don't know. So anyway,
you just wanted to get eyes
I
on
wanted
it
to
yourself.
see it because right. So we went there and the owner wasn't there, but through some calls we were able to get him there, and I explained what I was looking for, and he said, no, that's no problem. So in the beginning of that piece you saw, I climbed up that ladder and I saw, and I did understand now because there was that insulation and the babies were behind that insulation. So if you ever would have climbed up that ladder, no one ever just moves insulation
And
and
it
looks.
was like, it's like an attic, like how you'd see where you pull a thing down and have stairs.
Correct, but the stairs were always down because it got you to the floor of like these apartments that were up above, and there was some duct work.
So people use that stairway.
He said he used it 10 or 15 times. Never noticed. So that was that part.
And so when you got up there, you just saw, I mean, obviously the police and FBI by now, anything that's evidence had been removed.
Right.
You just got a visual on it. So it's just your typical attic.
Yeah.
Okay.
And with insulation, no big deal. And then we went to go get some extra shots, and the owner just said, would you like a tour of the place? And I have to tell you, I really didn't.
I'm not a fan of funeral homes.
No, but I was curious.
Get a sense for the story, yeah.
Right, yeah. So I said yes. So I went off on my own with the owner, where my crew was just shooting some other things over there. And this place is huge.
Yeah,
and that's one thing I don't think people get, because when you see the video and there's that entrance, it looks like it's just that building.
No.
There's like 3 buildings connected.
Yeah.
The square footage is top and bottom. There's a church. There's so much space.
And they were doing a lot of business
Yeah.
when, they were an operational, just from the stories that we did during the first issue, there were
Right.
so many families just within that 2 weeks who were calling. So,
Yeah. So he
you
goes, let me give you a tour.
Okay.
So we're walking around, and he showed me this is the place where we embalmed. This is the place where we did makeup. Not we, because he.
Correct.
And
He's
let me
the
clarify
owner.
too. The owner bought this, and he's turning it into a community center.
Okay.
And he wants to do something good for the community. And so he's been very helpful with police and state investigators. So
He had
people.
no idea.
He has no idea
Yeah.
any of this happened. And then,
how do you get to the basement?
well, he said, let's go to the basement because, and I'm making up the name Joe. Like Joe found 2 remains just a couple hours ago.
And he just said this very matter of fact.
Yeah. He's like, yeah, he found 2. I said, what? And then he said, well, wait, was there 2? Was there 4? I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, well, yeah, we found 2 today. We found 1 the day before and 1 the day before. And I said, do people know this? He said, well, the state knows because they keep coming back and they pick up the remains.
Yeah.
And so, because the investigation is open. So I said, so 4 more people, 4 more families, 4 more lives.
So that's what we're thinking. Obviously, there's a police investigation, FBI investigation. I'm sitting there thinking, who are these families?
Well, so we went downstairs, and we went downstairs, and it's a typical basement. I mean,
In an old building.
There's junk, there's pylons, there's, and then he said, yeah, it was underneath this shelf in a plastic bag where cremated remains would typically be, in another bag. And then down a little bit in a dark corner, there was more remains in a bag. But
a lot of people are asking, why isn't this funeral home being treated as a crime scene?
That's a good question.
it made me feel when I left yesterday and I talked to those workers, and these workers don't want to be on TV, and I understand that. I mean, I don't even know. I had a hard time going to bed last night because I just felt bad, you know, because I felt like there were so many souls there that were uneasy, and I thought to myself, I don't know if that should be closed off, and they should bring.
But why? That's really a good question, because when I think about it, in any other scenario, I mean, there was the fetuses, but there was also the body of an infant, a full-term child. Usually in any other scenario, they wouldn't want people coming and going that could.
Yeah, they're
tamper
cleaning.
with
They're
anything.
demolishing the building. I mean, everyone's got the masks, and they're cleaning, and they're bringing everything out. When I asked Laura yesterday, you know, how could you miss this? And I think we put that on our website. The response was that it was in a hidden area. When we went there, we were monitoring the structural business, the, you know, inspection like that. I said, well, then these remains are in the basement.
Some worker finds it. I mean, to me, like when the FBI or the police come in, it's like, whew.
All hands on deck. And I hate to say, I'm sure there's some type of canine that could assist.
Right.
From what and we didn't put this in the story yesterday because we didn't have all of the information. I didn't want to mislead anyone. That, you know, they did say that someone thought there was a name on one of the remains. Someone thought there was a date. They weren't sure. Mm-hmm. So there might be some more answers. There may be some labels. There may be some paperwork.
So where does it go now?
Well,
so I know the police investigation is still open. I know FBI is assisting. I know Chief Craig has been out in front talking about this. Laura now releasing this timeline, which, I mean, it's interesting. It's not really stuff that we weren't aware of necessarily. It kind of talks about the beginning of the license, and then it goes through the issues that we were aware of from 17 and 18.
Right.
You know, I think one thing that's really been interesting to me is who this tipster was.
Yeah.
Who knew that was there?
And how long? Because I also asked Laura yesterday.
Laura is not a person named
That's
Laura.
true. Yeah.
We mentioned it before, but just in case you're just popping
right,
on,
a state agency.
The licensing for the state.
They said we don't know when the 11 decomposing remains of the fetuses and babies were put there, which I can't imagine them closing it on April 25th and then someone coming back and putting them there.
Right.
But they wouldn't answer that question. They're like, we're not saying that they were there when we shut them down, and we're not saying they weren't. So
testing will be able to determine fairly easy how old those fetuses
And then
were.
I showed you yesterday, and we're not going to share the name of this yet because we want to help this family, but there's a headstone there with the name and the date, and it was a child. It was about 14 years old.
14 years old, and so we, typed the name in, found which cemetery the child had been buried at one point, but then there's some issue that, basically, long story short, it may not be a situation where the funeral home had done something wrong.
Okay.
The headstone may have just
It just
ended up
felt
back
strange that why is there this headstone that should be somewhere? It shouldn't be in the basement.
I can tell you in talking with him, because when you went, you talked to the manager.
I taled to the owner of the new
owner,
building.
rather.
You
Yeah.
talked
I talked to the manager.
Raymond Contrell.
And he was he was just all over the place.
Well, do we have that confrontation?
Did you
pull
I don't know
that,
how
guys?
serious of a confrontation was. We'll look for
Well,
it.
that was when he wasn't.
It was, yeah. My issue, my problem with him at that point was, the state had basically said very clearly, this place is a disaster. It's a mess.
Right.
There's bodies just outside, basically. In the garage. It's not refrigerated. There were multiple violations. And I'm like, hey, you can't operate this place like this. And he's like, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm like, I remember saying to him, I don't think you get it.
Right.
Like, you don't get it. No. You can't operate like this. And if the state said, so in that case, we were there and it was, tense because there were family members that were walking in saying like, where's my father? Where's my daughter? I want my love, so.
Well, then it also goes to the question, that's a whole other story about these funerals you can pay on a plan.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff, because that doesn't give them that's another whole issue.
Well, we were talking about the families, and I know one of our reporters, Dramont Terry, had done a story focusing on some of the families that were searching for information. So we have that story, right? Can we play that?
Devin, people trusted Cantrell Funeral Home, and now some of those family members believe that greed overshadowed the trust and respect their loved ones deserved. So many people wonder how the parents of these 10 fetuses and 1 infant found at Cantrell Funeral Home are coping. Yolanda Brewer has lived this nightmare.
I know they hurt me bad because it hurt me to know. It hurt me worse about these kids than it did my sister.
Memories of smiles.
There she is with her 2 daughters and myself.
Is how Yolanda prefers to remember her sister, Leela Brewer.
Yeah, I still cry today for her.
Those tears are a combination of the loss and the reality of how long it took to get her sister properly buried.
We just buried her the 16th.
The 16th of August, but this obituary shows Brewer had a funeral at Cantrell back on January 12, 2018. This Cantrell location offered payment plans, but on the day of the service, Yolanda says they told her sister would not be buried immediately.
I asked him then, so are you gonna put her back on ice since you're not gonna bury her? And he said, yes, she'll be frozen. Don't worry about it. Just bring us the rest of the money.
Receipts show Yolanda was making payments, and when the state shut down Cantrell in April, her sister's body was among 21 removed for improper storage.
And you find out she's in the garage stinking and everything.
Yolanda watched that day in horror. It took all those months to get Leila identified and into her final resting place. So when Yolanda saw police back at Cantrell last week,
I lost my mind. I couldn't believe it. Not only did he hurt me, my sister, my family, other people, but then to turn around and find little baby bodies in the ceiling was so wrong.
No, Cantrell Funeral Home was slapped with what's likely to be the first of many civil lawsuits today. Now, I had a chance to reach out to Raymond Cantrell, the immediate former owner of the funeral home. He told me, quote, when it comes to the lawsuit, it's news to me, end quote. We should point out that this news story in this case is changing rapidly and daily. We'll stay on top of it. Now, reporting live on the city's east side, I'm Jermont Terry, Local 4.
Jermont's been spending time talking to families who are worried and concerned that their loved ones,
Thanks, Kim.
I hate to say are missing, or, you know, I mean, they're trying to, right, they're trying to solve. And you've talked to families too, and that's the hardest part. Because we've gotten a lot of emails saying, I wonder, was it this time? Was it this month? Was it this year? Did he lie? There was somewhere where I was reading that, someone thought that the remains were buried, but then they weren't sure they were the right remains. And so then some parents were wanting to do some DNA tests.
Yeah.
It's just,
Especially
we've all
back
lost
during,
someone.
Yeah,
I
especially
can't even
back
imagine.
in the time when this first went down. There were so many families.
Well, you tracked him down.
We did track him down. We're gonna.
Are we trying to get that, or we don't?
We'll see it in a minute. But
Okay.
talk us through the timeline again, because like what I said that with this whole story that's so weird to me is that out of nowhere this tipster emerges. So
Right.
we've learned some new information about
And this
that.
is information that was just released this morning from the licensing agency from the state that is supposed to be monitoring places like this, funeral homes, etc. They are the ones that were responsible for shutting Cantrell down back on April 25th. So they're shut down. Then it says, according to this timeline that they just released, on August 28th, an anonymous caller reported that corpses were hidden throughout Cantrell Funeral Home.
Does it say where they called?
No, not there.
I'm guessing they just called police. They wouldn't call law.
But it got to them because it's
Right.
in their report.
Right.
So then it says the next day, following the consultation with the Department of Attorney General inspection, they yielded the discovery of a stillborn corpse in a box atop a table that was not present, they say, when they did the inspection back in April. Paperwork did include the death certificate that was for that stillborn. So that's the day after. But remember the tip was that it was throughout the building. So nothing happened.
Maybe they figured they found that one
But the tip was throughout. So nothing happened. So apparently whoever this tipster is was not satisfied, wrote an actual letter, a complaint, arrived U.S. mail, and it gave explicit instructions as to how to locate the infant corpses within the building. The owner, who I was talking about, who I talked to yesterday, provided access to the state, and they showed up around 4:45 on October 12th. The building was without power, and they went exactly to that area you saw in that piece where I went up those stairs, and they knew exactly where it was.
That's
So
somebody
this
who
tipster,
had intimate knowledge
Yeah.
of the building, who was either a former employee who had spent a lot of time in the building, or knew management, or management had told this person this is where this is not just some random person.
right. Now the LARA, the agency that inspects, did say a cadaver dog did sweep the facility, located no additional bodies. What we came
Cremated
across,
remains.
well, what we came across was cremated remains.
Right.
So there is a difference in terms of canines and the sense for that, et cetera. But this is another question with the state. You get a tip on August 28th. You go the next day, you find one body, but you don't do more of a thorough. They say that, and then they wait for a letter to come and say, hey guys, you found
back.
one, go back, go there, go up the steps, move this, and there's 11 decomposing
Right.
fetuses and babies.
Right. So you just wonder, like, how.
Well, there's a failure on the state.
How detailed, how intense the search was. I mean, were they ripping, you know how you see in the movies, were they ripping walls down? Were they, you know, they brought the dog in, but clearly not enough had been done. And they were probably looking in the main funeral home parts of the building.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I wouldn't suspect there to be remains in a basement area.
I mean, basement, okay, maybe.
Well, in the basement
but, like,
area,
hidden behind insulation.
But in the basement area, that is where they did the embalming, and that is where they did the makeup. I don't know if that's the right word, so I apologize because I know it's a.
Is that where the crematorium was? In the basement?
Yes, that's what they said.
So they were doing business down in the basement, but in the attic there wasn't anything going on up there.
No, that was a clear decision to hide. And then there's also the question, because many times with children, deaths and cremations, many times that is done for free. Mm-hmm. So then you wonder, well, why didn't this guy just get this done? Why? What was the motivation? It wasn't a money-saving thing.
That's the thing I just can't wrap my brain around with the, like, okay, I can almost understand the infant body, because I could say, like, maybe this is a family that for whatever reason wasn't able to pay to have the child buried or cremated. Maybe it was a newer death and he was waiting to see whether they were able to figure this out financially. But the fetuses and the number of fetuses, like that.
And hidden behind insulation in a drop ceiling. So like there's clearly, you know, it's wrong.
There's an intent to hide something.
Yeah.
So, you know, that part I don't really get.
I was just amazed yesterday when I was walking through that whole area. Was just, how calm everyone was. If I found the remains of someone, I would not be calm. I would be upset. I'd be freaking out. And then this individual found one, and I think I said in the story, like kind of below a shelf, and one somewhere else. And I said to them, I bet you're probably worried you're going to run into this again. And they all think, yeah, our job is to clean out this building, and we keep finding remains.
Right.
Is anyone?
Everyone's just horrified by the story. A lot of people are asking, will we ever know? Will we ever actually know what happened?
And, you know, that's what's interesting, because what a lot of people don't understand, because I was talking with another funeral home director yesterday, many times when, let's say, a baby or a person passes, many times the body might be at the hospital, most of the time, you know. So the hospital then gives the body to the funeral home, and there's paperwork that's exchanged.
Right.
Then, so you've got a body connected to a funeral home. You've got paperwork on that. And then when the funeral home gets it, and they do whatever they do in terms of put it in a casket or cremate it, there's a code or there's a number for that. So there is paperwork that says Joe Blow from the hospital went to Cantrell. Now at Cantrell, he went here. The problem is the paperwork. Where's the paperwork? And, you know, a lot of the paperwork is gone. A lot of the files are gone. But I will say, I did talk to a worker who came across some paperwork. Which, why are they coming across paperwork? That paperwork should have been all gone by April 25th.
What's really
and then
interesting
what?
too,
I mean, paperwork is answers to lives. The paperwork brings you. So why is there any? Why was any paperwork left in that building?
It's one of these. This story, I think, the reason, aside from how gruesome and horrific it is, it resonates with so many people because we all, at some point in our lives, are going to have some business relationship. You have to call it that, with a funeral home.
Yeah.
I mean, we both lost both of our parents, and it's just the reality of life. So then you start thinking, like, well, what's the funeral home that I'm doing? But which is what Laura, the state investigative agency, you can go online and you can look up any funeral home and you can see their inspection reports. And, you know, for the most part, it's a challenging job. Let's face it, you're dealing with high emotion, it's difficult. And you know, I'm sure there are many well-respected professional funeral directors out there that are doing their best. And a story like this gives, you know, the industry kind of a bad name. But you can go online and you can look up licensing reports, inspection reports, like you would for a restaurant or a grocery store or whatever.
But you have to depend on that agency is doing a good job. And whatever Laura, the agency, wants to say today, mistakes were made. They did not do the proper job.
We were talking about that story. So
this was when the place closed back on April 25th, around that time.
Yeah.
And you were able to track down.
This was the first time that this funeral home kind of got onto our radar. And I wouldn't say I was able to track down. We just walked in. He was there, and he was He really did not feel like he had been doing anything wrong, even though clearly there were some major issues. So we have that story. Let's take a look at it.
It's impossible to imagine what these families are going through. Human remains and ashes hauled out of Cantrell Funeral Home after the state finds decaying bodies and deplorable conditions inside. And Cantrell Funeral Home is closed today, leaving so many people wondering about everything from upcoming services to their prepaid funeral deposits.
Yeah. Consumer investigator Hank Winchester has spent the day digging for answers. And Hank, you confronted the owner about these issues.
Kimberly, Jason, I did. You'll see that play out. I can tell you this for sure. He really does not understand the severity of this issue. Take a live look behind me. You can see the gates here to the funeral home. Those are open. They've been open for the last few hours. That's where vehicles come in and out. The front doors here, just over my shoulder, though, closed through most of the day, and there's a good reason why. No. It's not just about holding their bodies. We're not talking about just holding bodies. You saw the inspection report. Right now, you're inside the Cantrell Funeral Home. The lobby appears clean, the office busy. From this viewpoint, you would have no idea about the gruesome discovery made by state inspectors inside this building yesterday. I just want to make sure people that had loved ones here, that had prepaid for funerals, they're getting their money back?
Their monies are in escrow, sir.
Okay,
So they can get them if that's what they want, but it's not held by Cantrell Funeral Home.
The state removing bodies, caskets, and cremated remains after discovering unsanitary conditions. Bodies covered in mold, unknown fluids on decomposing bodies, some just stored in the garage. But you understand that you can't just leave bodies in a garage.
If I leave them in my funeral home, then there may be some after effect.
You can't leave bodies in a garage. It seems like you don't understand that. That's part of the problem here.
Okay.
I just spoke with state inspectors on the phone who tell me what was discovered forced them to shut this place down immediately.
Some of those remains and the amount of decay and just, how they were being stored to allow them to, progress to that point and how long they had been there.
So what can you do to make sure the funeral home you select is up to code and really caring for your loved one? Just like many businesses, funeral homes are inspected and licensed. Those reports available to the public and online.
Asking for certification, asking for how long have they been in business, who is the chief person that is doing the embalming or the cremating.
Back out here live, there's a few different websites that can track those inspection reports and also the license for each funeral home. We're going to put links to those websites on the Help Me Hank page at clickondetroit.com. You heard him talk about the payments and money in escrow. Well, money should be moving to whatever funeral home families now select to complete those arrangements. If for some reason families do not get that money transferred, state inspectors want to hear from you, and I want to hear from you. We're live here tonight on the East Side. Hank Winchester, back to you.
All right, Hank, thanks.
So, that was, he didn't get it.
He didn't get it.
Right? He seemed almost dazed and stunned and shocked. And I'm nobody wants, if you're a business owner, state inspectors come and whatever.
Yeah.
But at that point, you got to take some accountability for it.
Right, and the fact that he's offering reasoning that
there's no reasoning.
His reasoning is ridiculous and offensive. So
yeah.
Now, people are asking, okay, so this is Cantrell Funeral Home. What does that have to do with other Cantrells? This is a story in of itself. It's Detroit Cantrell. Now, we will say state inspectors did inspect the East Point Cantrell 2 days ago, a surprise inspection. No, do we just lose our signal? It's all black. Oh, here we go. Oh, sorry. But anyway, so they did inspect the East Point Cantrell. Now, the person who owns the East Point Cantrell is the wife of the man who started the Detroit Cantrell.
Raymond.
Right. No, not Raymond's father, I believe.
Raymond Sr.
Right, Raymond Sr. So there is a family connection. Now, the attorney, Arnold Reed, for the East Point Cantrell is going to say there's no family connection.
Sure.
Well, she was married to him, so yes, there is a connection.
But have they released any information regarding that?
No. Now, the lawyer has said on the East Point Cantrell, the only thing we got cited for is some chipped paint on our door and a ring around the sink. That's what he says. I asked the state, what did you find out on the East Point Cantrell? And they're not releasing the information.
This is an open investigation.
But it does make you wonder, somebody tipped them off there. So they've already gotten 2 tips, and it took them a long time to figure it out, even by going in there. So You wonder what's.
We're also being told that Julia Dale, who's the director of the Bureau of Corporation Securities and Commercial Licensing with Laura, is going to hold a conference call.
Yeah,
with
like
the
3
media
today.
At 3:30 to discuss the Bureau's investigation, regulatory actions regarding the Cantrell Funeral Home in Detroit. Timeline provided below. So I think, to your point, because you're probably going to be doing this conference call, which conference calls are so silly.
Do a live news conference. This is
Real
1982.
news conference. Yeah, it's not WKRP in Cincinnati, people.
Do they still exist? Or was that all fictitious?
That was a 70s show.
Well, I know. I just didn't know if there
Stand in
wasn't
front of the
a-
cameras and answer the questions. And the questions that people want answered are, if you got this tip, this call, why did it take several weeks for you to have
2
to then
months.
wait to get a letter with detailed information? What happened within that point?
and why does
Were
a
the police
tip-
called? Were the FBI called? Who,
Yeah.
who?
When a tip says there's bodies buried throughout the building,
Why
don't you find them?
Now, the question is,
And I
did
will
these
clarify, some are remains.
Did some of these remains, were they brought in after that August? I
So then
doubt
that's
it.
a whole other conspiracy, if that's the case, that somebody's going into a lockdown facility and dumping human remains.
Which doesn't seem plausible. It sounds like these were there and they were hidden in the
Right,
attic.
and someone knew about it. What are folks saying on Click on Ken?
So people are asking if they can't find the documents, is the funeral home at fault, and can anyone face charges for a situation like this? Do you have any insight on that?
Well, I don't have any. I always hate to offer any legal advice on things like that because they'll always say, not that we're aware of, but
I would be
what I talked
very
to,
surprised if nobody is held criminally responsible for something.
Right. But the document thing is, when I spoke with that one funeral home director yesterday, kind of off the record, she just said, this is going to be a Jane Doe, John Doe thing. I don't think they're going to be able to track this all down. It's such a mess.
And the anonymous letter, it had to be from somebody that.
I want to know who the anonymous tipster is. Feel free to give us a call here at
We'll
the
keep you
station.
anonymous.
We'll protect your identity. Don't worry. We just want to ask some of the same questions. And same thing with.
And who put the remains up there? Why? And was it a continual thing? Was it known throughout the funeral home? Was it?
And if there are families, if you know people out there that have, still struggling and trying to get information from this funeral home about their loved ones, we want to hear from you too. And that to me is the most tragic part of it all.
I can't even
because
imagine.
all of these remains are connected to someone.
It's a life. It's a mother. It's a father. It's a sister, a brother, and like you said, we've had death in our family. And if that was the remains of one of my loved ones, I would really lose it.
A lot of people are saying that funeral homes in general there's a lot of room for fraud in the funeral home business.
Well, when you look at, there's so many. You can spend how much?
Well, you're at an
on a
emotional
funeral.
point
You're
in
at
your
an
life.
Emotional point in your life.
They can charge you, upcharge you. I mean, the guys even there yesterday when they were giving me the tour, and they're not part of the funeral home anymore, but they were showing me all these urns. They're like, look at this, and they upcharge people on this and this because they're seeing behind the scenes.
Right.
And it's
when you're at that point and you're dealing with your loved one, it's not the point in your life where you're like, well, I think I'll take the cheap package. You know what I mean? Like, you want to do what's best for your loved one, and I can remember 25 years ago when my dad died, and I can remember when he had a burial, but they were talking about whatever the thing is that they put the casket in, and they're like, well, do you want the one that's waterproof for 20 years or for 50 years or the lifetime guarantee? And you're like, well, of course lifetime, but like, we have no idea what they put in it. You know what I mean?
one's
Like,
checking.
nobody has any idea. So you're like, oh, that's $5,000. Well, the other ones we got to spend the $5,000.
Right.
So I mean, but again, there are a lot of funeral homes and a lot of funeral home directors that do it right and are trying to help people through a very difficult time. So we don't want to blanket the industry, because I've dealt with some in doing stories over the years who've been so helpful and really just great business people. But unfortunately, like in any industry, there's going to be some bad apples.
So as we're kind of wrapping up right now, we want to let everyone know we do have all of the background stories posted on Click On. You can see everything from the inspections that took place back in April to talking with families to our disturbing discovery yesterday when 4 more remains were found in different locations throughout the funeral home.
I know
This
you have to
timeline was
do
just
first at
released.
4, but you're going to do this conference.
No.
Okay.
And this timeline was just released, so therefore we'll post that on our website. And then Lara is supposed to answer some questions.
call.
So we'll get together and our team will have full reports for you today at 4, 5, and 6. And if anything else breaks on this, obviously we've been leading the charge on this story. We will continue to do so. So we appreciate your time and watching.
Have a good day, everybody.